Hi, Bryan. Bom dia.
Bom dia, José.
Obrigado por participares no nosso evento.
My pleasure.
Eu sei que falas português um pouquinho.
Não fala? Percebes um pouquinho?
There you go. You do speak a little bit Portuguese, but let's speak in English. Thank you so much, Bryan, for having this conversation with me and being part of of our foundation event. I'm sure it will be incredibly inspiring for our audience. You lived in Portugal, right? In your childhood,
That's right.
and
I lived in Portugal in the 1960s, and it was very different Portugal than the Portugal of today. I lived in Bir, which is just by Cascais, and a little tiny, which was, I guess, a fishing village one time. And it was just, it was very magical for me and my brother. We had a great time. Because first of all, everybody loves football in Portugal, and we love football, and so that was a big deal. But it holds a special place in my heart. You know, I grew to love the landscape of the Atlantic coast, like Cascais, and in my adult years, I've grown to appreciate the strong cultural heritage of the country. A few years ago, I was asked to do a selection of photographs of fado singers. When my father used to take us to very small little places in Lisboa where they would have the fadistas. This could have been the first time I ever saw live music.
wow, that's incredible. So we've inspired you, although you're much more upbeat than Fado, Bryan. Thank God for
No,
that.
but I'm just saying my music isn't like fado, but what it is that it was the experience of going to see musicians and singers. You know, even though I didn't understand what was being said, I got the passion.
It is a very strong type of music, isn't it? It's very unique.
It is.
Um, and um, and yeah, and by the way, you touched on photography, and you do amazing photography as is one of your many talents. And we will definitely I'll definitely call you one of these days, and I'd love to see those pictures.
Of course.
um, Portugal still has a lot of progress to make in terms of human development. We used to be in the 60s when you lived there. We used to be one of the poorest nations in Europe, if not the poorest. The illiteracy rate around that time, because it was the time of the dictatorship, was rampant, was around over 40%. And keeping people out of education, of the education system, was actually a tool that the regime had to avoid political change and to avoid
Is
people
that right?
questioning.
I didn't know that.
Yes, and we're still today, in a way, paying that bill. And if you look at the human development is about so many things, right? It's about access to health, access to good environment. It's about security and safety, but it's also about education. And if you look at all these things, education is what's dragging Portugal down in the index. There's a United Nations index in terms of human development, and we consistently we continue to pay that heavy heritage, and that's why we're so focused in education. And one of the questions I had for you, um, you know, you have done so many initiatives in philanthropy, and I know that certain causes are very close to your heart, such as the environment and biodiversity. And of course, if people are not educated, they don't understand how to protect these things, right? And so, how do you see the role of education in general, and in particular, how do you see it for the causes that are closest to your heart right now?
Well, I think education is a basic human right, and the value of access to quality education has been highlighted this year by the school closures around the world due to the pandemic. Um, for me, the world's biggest problems are centered around the environment and education, and it's absolutely crucial that people become more and more aware of the interconnection of the environment. Um, Education helps people understand how this interconnection things, how things are interconnected. For example, if the nations in the world that still do whaling, for example, that kill whales, it'd be great if that stopped, because it would help combat climate change. For example, whales store a massive amount of carbon in their bodies, which goes to, when they die, they rest on the seabed, and the amount of carbon goes back into the sea. Not only that, but the whale excrement, whale poo, fertilizes the ocean and produces large amounts of phytoplankton, which absorbs a lot of carbon dioxide. So helping whale populations recover would help reduce greenhouse gas levels in our atmosphere. It's strange to me in this time of our lives that people still do it, and I understand why it still happens, and it's poverty. That's the problem. A lot of people are hungry, and it's not getting easier now with this pandemic.
Absolutely. You touched on whaling, but I have to tell you the story I heard. Is it true that you single-handedly, on a paddleboard, faced a whaling ship and forced that ship to turn around and go back home, and with that, probably that day, saved the whale? Is that true? Is that a true story?
It is a true story. I was on holiday with my children, and my daughter came up to me. She says, "Look, Papa, there's a whale." And then suddenly this whale boat just came around the corner, and there was 3 other boats surrounding the whale. And I thought, what? So I jumped on my paddleboard, which I had, and headed out there and put myself between the whale and the whaling ship. And the whale basically disappeared.
That's amazing. I think that's the bravest story, and so spontaneous, right? It's just...
I don't know if I would have done it if my daughter hadn't said, "Papa, please save the whale."
That's so much like you, and I know you personally, and I've witnessed your passion for philanthropy, your passion for the environment, for biodiversity, for education as well. I know right now, as we speak, you are in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and you're going to visit the volcano, the areas affected by the volcano eruption. And I know that your family is not with you, and you decided to be there because you love that part of the world and the local populations, and that is incredible. And I think the world needs more examples of not just putting our money into causes. It is relatively easy to write a check. It's very easy to write a check. It's much harder to give our time and our talent and our love to a certain cause. And so how do you see philanthropy, and how do you see the importance of a philanthropic attitude? Not so much starting a charity, or which I know you have started, but more around a philanthropic attitude towards the world, even helping in little things, right? Helping in, I know that your family, when you were there on holiday and the volcano erupted, you spent a Sunday filling bottles, containers of water, desalinated water, to take to those populations that were, because of the volcano eruption, they were out of water in shelters. And that to me was a great example for your daughters also. And a great example for all of us. And how do you see the role of a philanthropic attitude today in our societies, and for our kids and for the next generation to understand and the importance of getting involved?
Well, first of all, your first question, I may go tomorrow out into some of the areas hit by the volcano, but suddenly there's a lot of rain and a lot of flooding happening. So I'm not sure it's going to be ideal tomorrow to go, but we'll see what happens. But in the bigger question, what a sad and uninteresting place the world would be if we were all acting as individual beings without any interconnections. I'm driven by the belief that small steps in the right direction can lead to bigger things. And now I have added the incentive of being able to pass that message down to my children. Sadly, the pandemic of last year has widened the gap in education with those schools with the more disadvantaged populations, and they're experiencing larger learning losses, and those in the higher income schools, for example. But I think setting the example amongst your own family, in your own community, taking smaller steps is the way to move things forward in a larger way. Because no single person can change the world, but you can help change in your community, and perhaps that will catch a fire. And so that's the objective I think everyone should have in terms of how they relate to bringing up their children, bringing up in this world that we're about to, this new world. You know, we don't even know what things are going to be like after this COVID sort of tempers down, if it does.
It's, you touch on the COVID-19 pandemic. We're now in 2021, isn't it? Isn't it crazy that we call it COVID-19 and we're already in 2021 and it's far from over.
Yeah.
You know, it was a very difficult year for everyone on the planet, but whether you were yourself impacted or your family or financial stability, we were all impacted in a massive way, and we were impacted psychologically, right? The prolonged periods of lockdown, anxiety over job security, anxieties over health. How did you see this year from that perspective, and what helped you keep the resilience we see today? What are your secrets in terms of keeping that positivity and that energy level and that outlook?
Well, first of all, as a musician, you probably know that for musicians in the last year and a bit, there's been no work. So it's been really tough for people in my business and their families. I tried to focus on remaining adaptable and upbeat. I really have to say that the last year, even though as terrible as it was, I enjoyed my lockdown. I had time to reflect on everything. I had time to spend with my family. It was a very difficult time for us, but at the same time, it was good to get back to family, and that's what I sort of focused on during this whole time. As we come out of it, it's going to be focusing on getting my team back together and getting them back on their feet. So I can only keep my fingers crossed that things will start to open up towards the end of this year. But my daughter has a motto, which is be brave and strong every single day of your life, and I like to live by that. You know, I think it's upbeat.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bryan. Looking forward to catching up face to face.
My best to you and your family, and thank you for having me on, and good luck with your foundation.
Thank you so much, Bryan. All the best.